This morning, we're going to continue a look at David, whose life inspires us 3,000 years later. David was a harp-playing shepherd who was also able to kill a lion. David was a warrior king who also penned songs and prayers that we still love. Quite a remarkable individual. You can see why Michelangelo chose David to make that statue of. Today, we're going to look at David at age 30. He has just been crowned king by Israel. This is 2 Samuel chapter 5, which we looked at last Sunday. And we initially see the warrior side of David. He takes the natural fortress that was there in the middle of Jerusalem, in the middle of Israel, named Jerusalem, and he makes it his capital. And then immediately he's attacked by the Philistines, who were basically his next door enemies. They want to nail David before he can consolidate his position any further, but David defeats them. So they regroup as a larger force, meaning that when David defeats them this time, it is decisive. And we read at the end of 2 Samuel chapter 5. And now in our text today, 2 Samuel chapter 6, we see a story of David that's now on the songs and prayers side, you might say. It shows his mystic side, shows his spirituality. Before we read, I read 2 Samuel chapter 6, I want to say a couple things about this side of David. First of all, those Psalms are 3,000 years old, and they are still loved. Psalm 23 of David is probably the world's best loved song, poem, whatever you want to call it, about God. That's a tall statement, the world's best loved, but I believe that that's true. Another remarkable fact about these songs and prayers, this was pointed out by historian Thomas Cahill. He has written a series of books called The Hinges of History, and one of them is called The Gifts of the Jews, the subtitle, How a Tribe of Desert Nomads Changed the Way Everyone Thinks and Feels. In his chapter on David, I want to read a couple things. This is a quote. A sense of self, Cahill says, is notably absent in all ancient literatures. I, as we commonly use it today to mean one's interior self, is seldom in evidence before the autobiographies of the early modern period. Before these, we can count only a few instances in the earlier literatures, and the oldest of all are the Psalms of David that are filled with eyes. The eye of repentance, the eye of anger, of vengeance, the eye of self-pity and self-doubt, the eye of despair, the eye of delight, the eye of ecstasy. It is with David that the interior journey begins. Here are some of the lines from Psalm 23, King James, of course. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Verse 4, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Now, how did David make this momentous shift in human history, talking about I? Was it that he just, had this creative stroke of genius one day that said, I should talk about I, talk about me? I believe rather that David's sense of self grew out of his relationship with God. It's not so much that he invented it, but that he just entered into it. His description of his inner states, of his emotions, flowed out of the conversations he was having with God. And that's the third thing that I wanted to say about this songs and prayers side of David. Point out how much David interacted with God. I really think, we like lives of comfort, right? We like, when everything is easy for us. But I believe that David interacted with God so much because he needed help from God so much. He was in danger most of his life. As a shepherd from lions and bears, he told King Saul that he killed both of those. He was in danger from giants. He fought the giant Goliath. He was in danger from a psychologically unstable, murderous king. The king before him, King Saul, tried to kill him again and again and again. Then there were the whole armies of the Philistines. His life was on the edge, and he knew that he needed God in those two battles with the Philistines at the end of chapter 5. David sought guidance from God. Basically, got his battle plans from God. God, for David, was this cherished, sought-after presence. And so he seemed to always be having conversation with God, and honest ones. You might think, talking to God, you better, use holy language, and you better sanitize it. It shouldn't have any negative emotions about it. Everything should be, polite and holy and pious. And no, you read the Psalms of David. If he's full of questions and doubts, that's what he pours out to God. He's honest. If he's full of gratitude and trust, that's what he poured out. Okay, now we're going to look at 2 Samuel chapter 6, at an extended story of what David, with such a spirituality, what he did. The first thing that he did after, he had been established as king, he had gotten the city of David, this natural fortress in the middle of Israel. The armies that had been a nemesis for Israel for generations, the Philistines, were now taken care of. What is it that he did? 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 1. David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000. So these would be, his troops that he just used. He got them together again. For what? Verse 2. He and all his men went to Baalim in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. The ark of God is this box or chest that was built under Moses' instructions, and it was placed in the most holy place of this tent where God met with his people. The tent, sometimes called the tabernacle. It was overlaid with gold, but the lid was solid gold. And on it there were two statues of cherubim, or angels, and there between the wings was the throne of God, where God focused his manifest presence. And David, of course, wants the ark of God brought into his new capital city. How does that go? Verse 3 of 2 Samuel 6. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all of Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. Such was David's excitement that he made a national parade about bringing this ark of God into his new capital city. Verse 6, when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. He didn't get to watch the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, which showed that you don't mess with this thing. Verse 8, then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah. David was afraid of the Lord that day. Verse 10, he was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite, not even an Israelite, the Gittite. So, talk about rain on your parade. One of the ones leading it, a main one, was struck dead by God. So what is going on here? A little backstory. About 70 years previous, the Philistines had captured the ark in a battle. But after only a few months, the Philistines sent it back to Israel. Because wherever the ark was, there was unexplained sickness, and the statues of the Philistine gods kept falling down on their face. So they got their priests and diviners together, and they said, how do we send this back to Israel? This is 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 7. And the answer was, well, you get a new cart, and you get 2 cows who have just calved and have never been yoked. Hitch them to the cart and set the ark on the cart. Now just think of it, what is the chance that this is going to work? 2 cows, never been yoked, they have calves. Are they really going to leave their calves? The diviners said, if those cows take the cart to Israel, we know the God of Israel is real. Well, 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 12, as soon as they placed the ark on the cart, those cows made a beeline for the nearest city of Israel, lowing all the way. I love that little note. The ark ends up in the house of this Levite named Abinadab. Probably it was the house of his father or grandfather at that point. The Levites were the families of Israel charged with caring for the things like this ark. So now 2 Samuel chapter 6, David wants to move the ark from where it was put 70 years ago. And he goes to the house of Abinadab, talks about moving it, and they say, well, the way you move it, you put it on a new cart pulled by oxen. Now, whose instructions were those? They were the Philistine diviners. But God had given specific instructions to Moses about how to move the ark. Moses had the ark built with those 4 rings on the corners through which poles were threaded, and then it was carried on the shoulders of Levites as they walked along. But Uzzah ignores that, perhaps openly defies it. We don't know how familiar he would have been with the law of Moses. And he substitutes basically the latest technology. A new cart. Because just think about it. A cart would be so much less work than carrying the thing, several miles. And what's more, a cart worked the last time. And wouldn't a new cart add a whole touch of sophistication to this whole parade? So that was what they decided to do. But the ark represented the majesty of the Holy One, and it was not to be moved in a way that it might have to be touched suddenly to keep it from tumbling. There are many ways in which technology cannot replace persons doing something. So, verse 11, the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months. During that time, 2 things happened. Verse 12, now King David was told, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God. So there was this blessing. And David realized, I'm missing out on that. The second thing, David evidently did some homework on how to move the ark, because the parallel account to 2 Samuel chapter 6 in 1 Chronicles 15 tells us that David assembled some Levites and he told them, this is verse 13, because you Levites did not carry the ark the first time, the anger of the Lord our God burst out against us. We failed to ask God how to move it properly. So, back to 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 12. David once again set out to bring the ark to the city of David. I like verse 13. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, David sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. They took 6 steps and they hadn't gotten zapped. So let's offer thanksgiving to God. If only they had gotten God's instructions before the first try. Verse 14, wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and sounds of trumpets. David was so full of joy in the presence of God that he abandoned all his kingly dignity. He threw off his royal robes and he went ahead of the ark, dancing in the street, wearing the simple linen robe worn by the priests. In 1 Samuel chapter 2, the boy Samuel is wearing one of these linen ephods. Now, what do we think of all this dancing and passion and enthusiasm for God that David is displaying outwardly? Let's bring the story into our day. Let's imagine one Sunday morning, there's this congregation somewhere opening themselves to God, sensing God's goodness, God's glory, God's wisdom in a new way. And they're not only sensing it, they're responding to it. Just as Brianna was talking about so vividly. I told Karen, I think Brianna is sort of, the people got the main point of the sermon from Brianna. Good job. They're not only sensing this about God, but they're responding, and they're experiencing the presence of God even more as they respond to it. And David, as the pastor of this congregation, is rejoicing in this God too. And as the congregation sings, David joins in with all his might, whatever that means for him as a pastor. Hopefully he's not showing emotion just for the sake of showing emotion. There are some churches where that can be a pitfall, but David, this pastor named David, he's letting what is really there on the inside, letting it be on the outside as well. He's excited about God. So there's passion as he sings. There's passion as he moves. His whole being is being given to God, not just his mind, not just his thoughts, but his emotions, his body. So he takes off his coat, maybe unbuttons his shirt a bit. When a child is excited, do they sit still? Not at all. Adults often do, because we have this sense of what is proper. We have this sense of dignity. But David was expressing his excitement for God, his love, his passion, his enthusiasm for God. Now, some of us might think, okay, David could do that. He evidently had that kind of expressive temperament. But it wouldn't be appropriate for me because my temperament is not so expressive. I'm not an emotional type of person. And I would say we indeed should not express our excitement in a way that's inauthentic for our temperament. We shouldn't just, put something on. But I would also invite each of you to consider, is there some kind of expression of emotion that is authentic for you? Brianna mentioned about when you're at a ball game and you're cheering, your son just scored a goal or your son just tackled a quarterback, sacked him. Not just tackled him, but sacked him behind the line of scrimmage. What is your face, your demeanor, your body language when that happened? Are you emotional at all? Well, I would say it's appropriate for you to display that level of emotion in church as well, for God. Even if God might be more marvelous than your kid, maybe even to up that level of emotion a bit. As we show our passion, our enthusiasm for God in ways that flow out authentically out of our personality, it is appropriate. And I would say probably the heart of the matter is not the way that we express our love for God, but whether we have those same feelings toward God that we have toward teams doing well. God is amazingly good. Not that God does everything that we wish, but God does act. Are we noting the good that he does do and then responding in songs, in prayers? And are we obeying God? Letting him show us how good he is. I mean, that's how you see how good a doctor is, right? You know, when you actually do what they prescribe, then, and if it works out good, you say, hey, this doctor is good. Are we obeying God and then responding to God's goodness, expressing gratitude and love? That's the main question. Are we responding to God as David did? And maybe sometimes dramatically responding as David did. And hopefully often we are responding in song and in prayer as David did. There's still a little bit more to chapter 6. And that gets at what is our attitude toward people who do respond dramatically to God. Verse 16, as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, so that's the previous king, and Michal was David's first wife. Saul didn't like David, but he just gave David his wife if he would pay this dowry, which was something incredibly risky. We talked about that a couple of Sundays ago. So this was David's first wife, Michal, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. And then verse 20, as David came home later that day, she came out to meet him and said, how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would. And David said to Michal, it was before the Lord. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this. I pray that we will not be like Michal in this story. May we not look down on those who worship God, body and soul. You know, if we are sure that they're putting on an act, and we have a close relationship with them, we can caution them, but if we are not sure, may we not be like Michal, and rather may we be like David in this story, a man who loved God with all his heart. Jesus said, that's the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And a man who responded to God, who openly expressed his feelings to this God. He could weep out his loneliness, his fear to God. Many Psalms we see that. And he could also voice his questions and doubts. And he could also give voice to his joy, his fervor, his passion for God. And he was going to be real about his feelings toward God, even if it meant acting undignified in people's eyes. May David's experience of God and his expression of his love for God be our example, our inspiration.